Excited to welcome everybody to this dynamic panel. I assume you joined because you have an interest in either learning more or you're already writing in multiple genres. You're the type of person who likes to genre jump or engage in hybrid work. It's definitely something that I have found myself experiencing more as of late. Fiction was my first love. And yet as I began to sort through just the various things going on in the world around us, I found myself also writing a lot more creative nonfiction. So when Noriko came up with this idea for this panel, I jumped at the opportunity to chime in and facilitate. And I'm so very excited to introduce the amazing panelists that we have today. Our first panelist is Tammy De La Torre. She writes fiction, memoir, creative nonfiction, essays, and poetry. She was a Steinbeck Fellow and a resident of the Writing by Writers Millhouse Residency. Her essay, Out of the Swollen Sea, was selected by Cheryl Strayed as a winner of the Peyton Prize. She's a 5-time essay contest winner, a 3-time Pushcart Prize nominee, and twice been recognized for notable essays in the Best American Essays collection. Her writing has appeared in Los Angeles Review, Los Angeles, Hobart, The Rumpus, Vita Review, Vice, and other literary venues. She obtained her MFA from Antioch University, Los Angeles. Thank you so much, Tammy, for joining us.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you. Next, we have Cecilia Caballero, and she is based in Los Angeles. She is a poet, creative nonfiction writer, teaching artist, and lecturer of ethnic studies. Cecilia is co-editor of the best-selling book, The Chicana Motherwork Anthology, and she is an alum of workshops and fellowships with Macondo, Tin House, and the Women's National Book Association. Her poetry and prose appear in Dryland, Epiphany, Raising Mothers, Gathering, a Women Who Submit anthology, and elsewhere, and her work has been nominated for a Pushcart and a Riesling. Cecilia is currently a visiting teaching artist with the Poetry Foundation, and she is at work on a memoir and a poetry collection. Thank you.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Thank you. Next, we have Jenise Miller. And Jenise is a Black Panamanian writer, poet, and urban planner from Compton, whose work explores art, archives, geographic mapping, and intersectional history. A Pushcart-nominated poet and Voices of Our Nation's Arts alumna, she is the author of the poetry chapbook, The Boulevard, and has published work in the LA Review of Books, KCET Artbound, Boom, California, Cultural Weekly, Dryland Literary Journal, and the Acentos Review. Thank you so much, Denise Miller. You see, Denise?
Glad to be here.
Yeah. And last but certainly not least, we have Wendy Ortiz. She is the author of Excavation, a memoir, Hollywood Notebook, and the Dreamoir Bruja. In 2016, Bustle named her one of 9 women writers who are breaking new nonfiction territory. Her work has been featured in the Los Angeles Times, the Rumpus, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Joyland, Story Quarterly, Fence, and McSweeney's, among many other places. Most recently, she was awarded a Tin House residency for fall 2022 to continue working on her next book. Wendy is a psychotherapist in private practice in Los Angeles. Social media handles are at Wendy C. Ortiz and Instagram at wendy.c.ortiz. And we'll make sure to put those social media handles for everyone inside of the chat. So if the panelists want to jot them down, or if not, I know that Noriko can get access to them, but the bio just begins to scratch the surface of the amazing writers that we have for you today. So please make sure to check them out further. And thank you so much, Wendy Ortiz.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. I think it's a great time to just go ahead and dive in. The first panel question that I was reflecting on was really about the kind of the germination of hybrid work. When you have a gem of an idea, how do you decide which genre you will lean toward? Like, do some of you have a primary or a secondary genre, or maybe is it like a story or character that drives the generative process? How does it come about?
I don't mind starting.
Thank
A lot of times for me, when I have a gem of an idea, as you were saying, it's usually has to deal with something very emotional or traumatic. And like my brother recently, he's been going through a drug addiction. And so how do I approach that type of story with a traditional narrative structure, with an arc and like an epiphany and resolution? It just sometimes doesn't work. So I kind of let the material tell me how to write the story. And if anything, that structure of that story is like a downward spiral that's just taking family and loved ones with him. So, you know, sometimes with something so distraught, I look for a really easy type of structure. I rely on structure a lot. So with something simple like an ABCD kind of essay or a triptych where I'm using three prose poems and putting them together. I think, you know, I started with poetry in elementary school as my primary. And then I got my degree in fiction at Antioch. So I'm constantly thinking about storytelling and lyric, the beauty of the language and images and rhythm of a story. One of my teachers, Dorothy Allison, you know, she told me I should write my coming of age story as a novel. So I was trying for a long time to write it as a novel, and it just didn't work. And I only by really accepting it as true and my story and really digging into every truth of it did it start to have any success. And, you know, recently I was selected by the Steinbeck Fellowship to work on it. So I think it's working well more as a memoir with lyric qualities.
Thank you. And sorry about your brother, but I think many of us can relate to kind of using our writing to process some of those things. But I do appreciate you sharing with our attendees that sometimes it's just the emotional nature of the work you're dealing with that informs the direction you start to take it. So thank you so much. Someone else.
I can go and add to, like, very similar to what Tammy shared in terms of like the words. I kind of follow the words. Sometimes I want to write something like, and I want it to be short. So I might be inclined to write a poem, but it wants to be longer and there's just a lot more information there. I've noticed that for me, like when I have an idea, like I'll come up, the idea will come, like the inspiration will come, and then a title will come. I often have a title like from the beginning, and it'll stay the same title. And the title is like a guide for me in the writing. And so like when I was working on my chapbook, I don't know, I just had a lot of poems in me, like all of the stories. I was thinking about like, oh, you know, where I grew up is this apartment building. And so I was thinking about writing about like, you know, different families, different things that would happen depending on where you were in this apartment complex. And I was thinking like House on Mango Street, like vignettes. But for me, it ended up being like poems. And it was just kind of like excavating like all of these experiences that I had when I was younger. And then once I did the chapbook, like the poems, they kind of went. And so I've been writing like essays and articles ever since. And with the essays and articles, it is a bit more of information sharing. Like I'm looking at archives, I'm looking at history, I'm looking at art. So in that sense, the form tends to be, you know, a bit longer because I'm working with more information.
Thank you. Having read some of your essays, I definitely see how the poetry influences the writing though, because there still seems to be such a poetic quality. So thank you for sharing kind of how you've started to make a transition as you are writing longer pieces. Before moving to another question, is there another panelist that wants to talk a little bit about kind of how the gym comes about and how they move into certain directions with different genres that they may lean toward or move away from?
Anything that I would add is kind of an echo of what we've just heard. It's like I have to let the story, sometimes the word, sometimes an image, just I have to follow that. And that's what tells me what it's going to look like in the end. And I've actually been moving further away from fiction and poetry because those were genres that I used to write more often. But lately I'm noticing that everything I'm writing is suddenly so much longer. I used to write a lot in fragments as well. Now everything, it feels like since the pandemic started, that has changed my writing, my process, and what genre and what forms my writing will take. So now everything feels a lot longer and ends up looking pretty much like lyric essays, all of it. So, but it really is just dependent on what the subject is, what images I'm working with, that leads me to the actual form.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I think many of us probably can relate to the ways that the pandemic have kind of affected our writing and our process. But what I really seem to hear all of you saying is to lean into letting the words guide you. And, don't try to force something just because you feel like, well, this is the type of writer that I am, because clearly we're evolving. And I think as artists, we're affected people, and there's no way that we can not be affected by the things that we've all kind of experienced the last few years. So thank you so much. My next question, and I know some of our other panelists definitely have a lot to chime in and share too. This was a question, I hope that the attendees agree and are grateful for it, but this was solely a question because of my own disorganization. So I wanted to know, how do you stay organized when flipping between multiple projects, maybe multiple genres? Please share your wisdom with the rest of us, because I sometimes find myself starting things but then not finishing it, because then I have this other thing and then I'm flipping through different genres and different strategies and life is happening. Do you have any tips in that area? Cecilia, do you have any tips for maybe staying organized when flipping through the genres?
Yeah, I think organization is so important. I'm in several writing groups where we co-write, and so many times I'll share what we're going to work on. It's like, I need to find that piece that I was working on like 3 years ago because I need it now. My strategy for organization, because I'm so busy, is what's the least amount of organization I can do that will be most efficient and not like so time consuming with the organization and administration of the organization. Just efficiency and practicality. So, to be honest, whenever I start writing, it's free writing by hand, which is kind of tedious. And managing the notebooks, it's like every time I move, my husband, now he's my husband, is like, oh my God, we have to bring all your notebooks with us. So it's really simple. It's just whatever feels like there's heat and there's juiciness and there's magnetism and I want to come back to it. Sticky note, flag it. And I don't even immediately put it into my computer. I just put it into an inventory with a long ass description of what it is. So it might be, this year I've been writing a lot about my dad because he had cancer and he went to chemotherapy and he passed away in February. So there's a lot of material that I'm kind of like organizing around that, and sticky notes and an inventory. And when I first came to LA, I took a class by Holiday Reinhorn, and she had told me, like, here's your notebook, right? Skip the first 3 pages and then you write and then you inventory what you wrote. So I don't know, that's just kind of been in my DNA since I've been living here in LA, to do it that way. And, sometimes the inventory has been an Excel spreadsheet or a Word doc or just the front of my notebook. But as long as I know what I've been writing about, then later that inventory helps me to see like what I was writing about my dad, because it's not just like what I was writing about when I was going through the therapy with him, but it was like past things that I'd gone through with him, or when he's in his garden with his tomato plants. And so it really helps me to see, like I can just search in my inventory, like dad and tomato or dad and chemo. And it helps me to see patterns. So even like just personal patterns, just like, oh my God, dating, you're awful. So just those kinds of things that do help me in, if you need a resolution, if you need to say something eventually when you get to the telling part, right, of your storytelling process of if you're a personal writer, what you've been doing in your life, noticing those kinds of patterns. But that's my take on organization, efficient.
Thank you. And I see some questions popping into the chat. Cecilia, did you have something to offer as well about organization strategies?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm always learning new strategies and systems all the time. And I've learned a lot from my Virgo friends on that. But I think for me, specifically when I'm drafting kind of, so I think maybe in general to, kind of explore and see what works for you. For me, especially this past week when I was just drafting a lot of new material, but I was drafting in both, essay, creative nonfiction, and then also poetry. So when I was doing that, and I was really happy with it, so I was just using the same Google Doc, and I was going in and originally started with one essay idea, and then I drafted that, and then I started another one, and then poems, and then so it's all just in one document, because otherwise it can be hard for me to just keep track of my multiple projects. So I think that's just one thing I tried with just drafting new material, but I also like writing by hand and journals. So I think that's one thing with drafting that I've been trying more recently, and I'm really happy with it. And then in the revision process, then I'll go back. My plan is to go back and pick one and work with that one piece more closely. And then I think it's also reminding me of the previous question. So one thing that it's just kind of like a saying that I tell myself of, when I'm going in and drafting, I write what wants to be written. So I really just give myself permission to, really no limits, just write. I'm writing the essay, but if I have another idea, just go in and write that. And I think that also, by keeping it on one document with my drafting, at least, it really helps me just to keep track of it that way.
Oh, thank you so much. And it does really kind of tie into that, even when you just have that gem, not feeling obligated to open a million tabs like my computer seemingly looks like, but keeping it all together to let kind of the idea inform what it wants to be. One of the questions that's coming up is inventory similar to an index or table of contents?
I guess that question's for me. I just call it an inventory because Holiday called it an inventory, and it's just what I call it to keep organized and track everything that I've written that has juice for me, that I think that I'll come back to later. Obviously when I'm starting a book, then I have a table of contents for my memoir with chapters and such, but as I'm writing my memoir, maybe I'm writing an essay on, I recently wrote this essay about all the self-care techniques which were not self-care, right? It's facetious. So drinking too much, or, you know, taking a drug or whatever, self-care. I wanted to pull all those things from my inventory. It's like, oh, this is kind of a pattern that I have. Like, this is how I take care of myself. And self-care was, you know, talked about a lot during the pandemic. So I was like, yeah, this is how I self-care. And it was no one has accepted this essay yet, but I'm still working on it. But you can see, like, I'm pulling themes from this inventory of writing that's Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you, Cecilia and Tammy. Does any other panelists have some little tips on organization for us?
I can add that something that has been working for me lately, as somebody who used to have multiple notebooks, each notebook would have its own subject, and that just became unwieldy after a certain point in time. So now what I've done is I keep all, and I also start longhand too. So I keep a handwritten notebook, and if I'm working in multiple projects, I have different color post-it notes that I put for each time that I'm writing, so that I can keep track of, like, this is the TV writing, this is the essay, this is the book. And that helps me just when I can go back and just like flip to those pages and start transcribing them. I also keep one other notebook that's just called assignments. And they're the assignments that I give myself when I know that I need to write about like a specific thing, or I need to read a specific thing or watch a specific thing. So there would be a page that's like, okay, I need to work on these chapters, and these are the things I know I need to write to make these chapters happen. The next page is assignments for a different project. And that really helps me stay organized and on top of all of these things, because it's too easy for me to lose. If it's just on the computer, it helps me a lot to see it in my handwriting in a notebook. So right now I'm limited to just these two notebooks, which is way easier than how most of my life I had kept all of these different notebooks, different subjects. So now it's kind of all in one place with just different colored post-it notes to keep it organized.
Thank you. I'm hearing from all of you so far, writing in longhand, handwriting the idea out seems to be a great strategy. Maybe trying to keep things in one document, or maybe a little bit more into one place. And it seems like we're also just giving ourselves some grace with our disorganization, because we, as writers, are creative people. And so the ideas are constantly coming, but I'm so grateful for these tips that you're sharing. Jenise?
Yeah, so I can say, like, what I have journals. I'll start there. What hasn't worked for me with the journals was, so I tried to like use different color pens. And I do have a particular pen that I like. So I got, different color pens in that particular brand. I even bought the ink because I was reusing the pens. And I said that, okay, if I write poetry, I'm going to use this color. If I write an essay, I'm going to use this color. But then I would lose the pens. And so that absolutely did not work. And then everything would just be in black. And it's like, wow. So then what did work, or what does work for me, is like, I have a particular journal that I like to use. I can put in the chat what it is, but I think you can create it if you wanted to with any type of notebook. So this particular journal is from Minimalism Art. So it has, like, in the front, it has a table where you can put the page and the content. So like if I'm working on different essays, and it helps me to actually just use like one notebook for whatever projects. I can, and then it has pages, the page numbers at the bottom of the notebook. So I can put in the content section, the title, like I mentioned, I usually have a title, and then the page number where I find wherever I wrote about that. I do tend to write freehand poetry, and then I use like Word and Google Docs for like essays. And usually that's because I have like citations and like references that I'm using. So it's easier for me to type those and like hyperlink references in a Word or Google Doc than it would be, in a journal. And then in the back of that same journal, I create my own chart. And might be too much structure, but it helps me. And in that chart, like I'll have like the title of the piece. Like, let me see, do I have an example? I don't have it in front of me, but I'll have like the title of the piece, what type of piece it is. Is it an essay? It's an article, poetry. I have the ideal place where I might want to see it published. And sometimes that's blank because maybe it doesn't need to be published or I don't have an ideal place. I'll also have like the page numbers in that particular journal where I can find all of the different places that I wrote about it. I'll have notes, a note section, and then I'll have a references section. Like these are the different things that I'm reading that are informing this piece that I'm writing. So I have that in the back of the book. So an ongoing list that I can refer to of what I'm working on at all times. And then sometimes if it gets really intensive, like in terms of references, I'll make myself a syllabus. It works for me. Like, so all the references and like the assignment for the syllabus is like, to write whatever piece that I'm working on. But it's like you said, like, how do you stay organized? I'm not sure about the staying organized part, but this is how it kind of works for me so that I'm aware of everything that I'm working on. And I do have a pretty good memory too. So I'm usually aware of all the things that I have working on, but like that structure that I mentioned also like helps as well in terms of like direction and where I need to go next. And then I can also like check off when I've done something and I published it, I'm like, I actually did that, and
Exactly.
It's exciting.
Thank you. The chat's just got it going live. People are so excited about a column for an idea of a dream publication. Maybe they'll have a column for a dream illustrator, and just that kind of visionary aspect of looking beyond the work that you're doing into where you might even eventually want to place it. So thank you all so much for the generosity of your ideas. And I want to let the attendees know we are definitely going to have a Q&A at the end of the panel as well. So if I miss some sort of question that you have in the chat, I'm scrolling around. One question I did note that I think we can touch on briefly before we move on is, are you all carrying notebooks around or are you using an app? Somebody wants to know.
Carrying notebooks.
Carrying notebooks, all right.
Yeah,
So,
but it's just one. It's just
yeah.
one notebook. So it's pretty easy.
Okay.
Same.
I also carry a notebook.
And especially since maybe we're, leaning initially into the process with longhand. So far carrying a notebook around. And then there was one other question I thought I saw. I will look for it and I will come back to it. My next question for everyone, and this might have even been a better question to open with, but I'm sharing this question because when we started reflecting on this panel and kind of hinting and promoting and telling people that we were going to do it, someone messaged me and they said, well, how do you even define hybrid model? Like, I think I'm a hybrid writer. I feel like that's the direction I'm going. And the question really was, for all of you, do you feel that this is kind of publishing in different genres is what makes you a hybrid writer? Or is it more maybe mixing different genres or a little bit of both? And the question that'll just kind of come after that, in case you want to speak to this, is why do you gravitate toward genre shifting? So kind of what is hybrid work? And maybe why do some or all of you feel like you're gravitating towards shifting genres? Anyone want to start with that? Are my questions clear? Wait.
I don't mind.
Maybe, I was just gonna say, maybe there's a reluctance in us answering this because it's to me, it's kind of like all of the above.
Okay.
And also I almost hesitate to like give a like strict form or definition to what this is. But I don't know, I'd love to hear what other people think about defining it.
I received that. And I definitely didn't feel like I could essentially define it, but the question definitely was one that came up a couple of times with people saying, well, I want to come to this panel, but what does this mean? What kind of is this world? And it seems to be a trend where writers are feeling inspired to kind of mix genres in their work. And so anything you can share in that vein, as far as maybe why you might do that from time to time, or how you would define it, that would be great. And thank you, Wendy.
I mean, I think for me, when I thought about this question, I feel like how I write is so closely aligned with my identity, in terms of I grew up in Hawaii, and there, racially and culturally, it's a mixing pot, it's a melting pot. And that's kind of how I think. And I've had a lot of traumatic experiences. So I just think in a hybrid model a lot of times. And I also think that it's very inspirational in terms of just looking at what other people are doing in terms of structure and combining things. Just recently, you know, I thought, oh, I better like brush up on some hybrid writing now. But I came across some really interesting stuff, like Alison Cobb's Greenwood, and just the blend of how she's writing poetry in paragraphs is inspiring to me. And yet, like how she's using strategies of poetry to put prose next to each other, like different prose things next to each other. And that's inspiring to me. I'm also reading Schizophrene, which is like, it's supposed to be about the mental anguish of migration, immigration. And she's doing it all in structure. She's not necessarily doing it with the words that she's saying, but that's inspiring to me. And I picked this up at the LA bookstore if anybody wants to request it. It's Float, and it has all these little books in it with little poetry and these little pamphlets. And I was just so inspired. And there's no linear progression through each of these individual books. And so I started my own like little book collection that I'm writing, and I keep these little books in my wallet so that I can just go to Starbucks and write in them. I mean, I'm endlessly inspired by hybrid, you know, in a way that I'm not inspired necessarily by linear storytelling. And so I'll try and read something on the New York Times bestseller list, which, you know, sometimes I'm like really bored because at the sentence level, there's nothing exciting going on. And I'm like, I'm going to have to read all these sentences to say, these boring sentences to say that I read this person's book. And I just don't want to. Like, I really want to be engaged and like have that compulsion of the language. Anyway.
Thank you.
I want to say that I am so glad to hear this, because I finished a memoir that is written, I think I call it hybrid, because it is written in layers. So I wrote it some prose and some poems, and that came as I was walking El Camino, and came some memories of, you know, I am an immigrant to the United States. And so it is a mix, and I am trying to see where I can, you know, submit this. And I am glad that someone is inspired by that type of writing.
Thank you. Cecilia, do you have something to share?
Yeah, just to kind of thinking about what Tammy shared, and yeah, I'm going to put this quote in the chat that that always inspires me, by an Indigenous woman academic and writer, where she says, the only difference between a history, a theory, a poem, and essay is one that we ourselves have imposed. So that just helps to, you know, kind of affirm just non-Western ways of just like storytelling and knowing, and you know, what even is the, you know, how are we defining, delineating between, you know, poetry, fiction, nonfiction, and other genres. And I think for me, for example, in my memoir, creative nonfiction, so something like, you know, growing up with, the belief in, you know, ancestors just being very much present, or you know, ghosts and things like that. So I think, the way that my mind works, I feel like my mind is very, it's very fluid, in the sense that I do have trouble staying in borders and boundaries. And so when I'm drafting, is actually probably when I'm happiest. And then later when I go and revise, I'm like, oh, well, you know, this is like the structure of, you know, I could use this form of an essay, or, you know, whatever. But I'm definitely happiest when I'm drafting, because for me, that's the place where there just are no limits whatsoever at all. And then later, it's when I'm going back, and it's just like, okay, you know, will this be published in whatever venue, and, you know, the audience, and, you know, these other things come into play. But I think what I always try to come back to is just coming from that space of just writing, just getting those words on the page, and telling stories. And then some of these, you know, hybrid work, you know, other kinds of genres or conventions that we've been taught, you know, kind of come into play later for me. But yeah, that's one way that I think about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that quote. And thank you, Tammy, for sharing about float. I saw someone in the chat, I can't see it now, but they had said they feel more seen in hybrid work. And it feels like that's really what you all are sharing as well. And I'm hoping that our attendees feel really seen in all of you too, because that's in essence what we're grappling with as writers. We are, you know, talking to our ghost and talking to our ancestors and processing our trauma and sorting through the ways to kind of labor over our work and deliver it out into the world. And it seems for many of us who are excited to be here today that kind of hybrid approach to it is one of the best ways to go about that. Jenise, yes.
Yeah, and I like to add, like, I mean, I do see hybrid as being, well, you know, it's possibilities, right? And it's both, okay, someone who writes in different genres, but then also those genres can be, you know, mixed. I think of like Alice Walker, just because I was working on a piece where I looked towards her work, her essay In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And it's an essay, but then she ends it with a poem. And like the poem is dedicated like to, you know, to her mom. And in that sense, I think the essay is like working through the ideas, but the poem carries like the weight and the emotion of what she's talking about in that sense. And then I also see like hybrid as, you know, one genre being, I guess, translated through a different form or art form. So I think of like, there are a lot of poets doing a lot of interesting work that I like, or that I'm interested in. It's interesting. Like poetry plus technology, like just, or visual, like the way that they're visualizing poem. And that's something I'm interested in exploring, I guess, as an urban planner, because I used to do GIS mapping, or I still can and do. So I'm interested in like mapping poems and how that kind of like mimics migration, especially if I'm writing poems about migration and like movement. There's some poets who are doing work around like collages, you know, combining collage with words. So I really like that. Reina Leon is a poet that I follow who's doing that. As far as the technology, Lillian Yvonne Bertram, I think she has a whole book of poems that was created from like using like code, like open code, or like she would put something into like a program and it would like come out with the poems, and I think she would work with that. So I see hybrid like that too, like, or even like choreo poems too, right? Like there's the blending of like song, poems, and dance. And I mean, I like you know, exploring different types of art. And I think poetry is really good for that. But I would love to see that, like, you know, I guess with essays, but it seems like poetry is more, you know, you can use it and translate it in different forms more easily.
Thank you. We're sharing a bunch of resources in the chat, so I hope everyone's kind of chiming in and following along. Many of you have done a great way of helping me segue into the next question, which is, what mixed genre work or writers inspire you? I know for many of us, as we're trying to negotiate our own work, one great way to do that is to read the work of others. And I've definitely already shared with Noriko, please have her list all of your work, because your work as panelists have definitely been inspiring to me. But what are some things that are inspiring you? And I know some of you have kind of already anecdotally shared in your feedback, but if there's anything specific that you feel has really informed this journey as a writer, and then more specifically as a hybrid writer, could you share that with our audience? I saw a couple in the chat, inspired by Allison Cobb, Greenwood. Oh, and the Schizophrene book. Yeah, I was wondering, because I had not heard of that yet. So thank you, Tammy. Anyone else with some things that have inspired? Wendy's essay in Joyland, is it something that I definitely could see?
I would say Alyssa Washuta, her book, My Body is a Book of Rules, and then her most recent book, White Magic. But really, My Body is a Book of Rules is, I'm thinking like there are sometimes incorporation of lists or TV watching descriptions that come into the writing. Yeah, she's doing amazing work. I feel like she's sort of, I see her as like cutting edge nonfiction writer who's a contemporary. And I'm also thinking of Margot Jefferson, who, you know, she's writing memoir, but it's cultural criticism and memoir. And then sometimes she's using different, like she's saying, I, me, you, in different ways throughout one piece of work. So she's sometimes writing from those different perspectives, which feels like it kind of, it's like she's breaking through the fourth wall to readers in a certain way. I just love her work, and I would recommend like doing a search of any podcasts that feature Margot Jefferson speaking, because she's wonderful to listen to as well. I learn a lot from listening to her.
Thank you. Noriko, can we put that in the chat? Because we see that a lot in TV, but it feels like it would be really hard to do in writing. So I'm excited to see how she navigates that. And I thank you. I see a lot of panelists like jotting down people in the chat. So please make sure we're noting that. Is there any other inspiration that comes to mind?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Wendy, about the different types of pronouns, because I just, I'm kind of in the middle of Thrust by Lydia Yuknovich, and she does a lot with pronouns. I mean, I just love the beginning of her book. I could just like read it again and again, but it's something that I'm finding really inspirational, and it almost seems like a natural way. Like, I don't think that it's constructed. It feels like we, you, I, it all feels like a flow, and it just incorporates me and like takes me out. Anyway, it's something I find very inspiring too.
Thank you. I'm inspired by all of you. I know that mixing genres can feel very aspirational for some writers, but it can also create kind of some confusion. And that was essentially why I was trying to clarify, you know, for people, what is this kind of starting to look like? But what I would love to get some additional feedback, and I know some of the attendees have shared the same. Do you feel that there are some changes in the market trends for hybrid work? Like, do you see that it's becoming maybe more widespread, or do you feel that it's still somewhat niche? I mean, I think of like, Brown Girl Dreaming or kind of more lyrical work. And at the time, sometimes you're reading it and it feels like, oh, wow, I've never seen anything like it. But from a market standpoint, do you feel like you're seeing more of this out there? See.
I think so, because I'm no expert. These
Oh,
are
yeah.
really just my thoughts. Like as I scroll through Twitter, here are the trends that I've noticed. Because like with Twitter, right? Like we're looking at like folks, maybe in the journalism arena, like wanting like shorter pieces. Because I guess maybe folks' attention span to like read something longer, or people are like reading on their phones, so something that's going to articulate, like if I'm reading it on my phone, like I don't have to keep scrolling, or like something that is more visually interesting, or incorporate some type of visual into it. I think because of technology and our use of it, it provides the opportunity to explore different genres, and as well as as I mentioned, like genres, how we're working within those genres. Like I said, we're like the visual poetry and like the poetry that like involves like code and things like that. I guess I see that perhaps being a trend, but I think it's not a trend, I think, that's taking away from, like form, like an essay, like a really good essay, a really good long essay, you'll still read it, if it's really, resonating with you, you know what I mean? So I think, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'll take, and you are indeed an expert to us, so thank you. It's officially Q&A time. I did have another question, but I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to chime in from our audience as well. The question I was going to pose, and maybe we can follow up in another way, or you all can share some feedback and I can provide it to the larger community later, was just when you're looking to publish a piece that might cross genres, how do you decide where to submit? So if you have some literary journals or magazines or outlets that you feel have been really supportive or are friendly or receptive to kind of hybrid work, I will try to connect with you all and maybe just gather some resources, or you can drop it in the chat as we're talking, and we'll put together a one sheet for everybody and make sure that it's shared far and wide within Women Who Submit. But what I don't want to do is inch too far into Q&A. So I'd love to open it up to those who want to answer those questions that maybe I wasn't able to pose.
Feel free to use the raised hand feature or to raise your hand on screen and we can take some questions.
Thank you. I'm scrolling through to see. And I saw some questions in the chat too that I wasn't able to get to.
I know it's one of those things that's like, okay, the bigger the room, like the less likely that folks are going to raise their hand and share a question.
I thought this was interesting, Ryane, in regards to submissions, and
Yes.
just reviewing submissions is sometimes I don't know what to call something. And so I have tried to submit something to the creative nonfiction editor and not had luck, and submitted. And it's not because I'm trying to get around the creative nonfiction process, but I was like, well, maybe this is a poem, so I'll just submit it to the poetry editor. And the poetry editor has actually said, oh, really like this, but I'm going to hand it over to the creative nonfiction editor, and gotten published twice that way. Not suggesting you do this, or not trying to say like get around the CNF editor, but it's just been interesting because a lot of times we don't know what to call our work ourselves, and it might not immediately catch the eye of the person that, you know, would edit that stuff.
That's insightful. And I'm glad that it worked out that way for you. One question that I saw in the chat, if we don't have any hands that have popped up, I don't think I got to this question. What where and how do you catch your inspiration when you're out of the house? I don't know. I'm a consummate eavesdropper, so I listen in, and I'm a people watcher. So that's kind of where I'm gathering my inspiration. I'm stuck in my car a lot too. So some of my essays are rooted in my car with my kids because of LA traffic. But panelists, where and how do you catch your inspiration when you're out of the house? That was a question in the chat. Or do we leave our house? I don't know. It's a pandemic. Like, where have we gone?
I think that was during the conversation about the notebooks and people handwriting and using voice memos or emailing themselves inspiration and ideas. So I think folks were just curious what our panelists, where they were capturing their ideas.
Awesome. Oh, somebody keeps raising their hand. Let's see. Oh, yes.
Sarita, do you want to go
Hi,
ahead?
Katie, sorry.
Oh, okay.
I was wondering if there's any concern about like writing in sort of different blended genres as far as publication. Like currently I'm working on like a memoir and a like fantasy young adult book. And I sometimes worry, like, would it ever be feasible for me to be like an author in both genres, or will that be like confusing, or will that make it hard for an agent to ever want to work with me? So that's just something I think about, if anyone has thoughts on that.
It's a great question. Any thoughts?
My impression is that your agent will be happy that you wrote anything for them to sell. So if you have strong work in any genre, well, I will say that poetry is not considered by agents often to be the thing that's going to sell. But absolutely, I don't think that you would have a problem from what I understand, working with agents. It would be wonderful to have work in more than one genre, as long as it's strong.
Great, thank you.
I think, and I'll add to that, to the question about like going out and inspiration, like, I mean, art, I see a lot of art in my community, like murals. You know, I feel really, fortunate to grow up in a place where we have like public art. But then, going to museums and, and it's interesting because like where I'm from, Compton, and seeing like folks' artwork in certain places, and like in my community, I can touch it. But when I go to a museum, like there's a piece of tape that tells me how far I can get to the artwork. So that tape like inspires me, like, why is that tape there? Why can't I touch this? So things like that. But going to the museum, like it will inspire you in all kind of ways, like whether you can